We already learned about arrays and lists in Scala. Our goal in this session is to understand how we can iterate through the list or arrays. But before jumping to Foreach or how to do that, I'm going to talk about very briefly about function literal. So basically, function literal is another way of defining a function. So for example, I want to define a function that adds up two values. I can just specify it this way. In a traditional way, we would say def add, right? Define a function add, and we would pass a from the type integer and b from the type integer, right? And then we would say a plus b, right? So instead of doing all those, we can just use this and define the input parameters in a parenthesis, and then we use this, and then we write the body of our program. Usually this is useful when you have only one-liner function, and also when you want to pass the argument to a higher order function. So I think you got the idea of function literals. There's more about Scala literals and more about functional literals, but really we don't need to know about it now. We can always revisit this topic later. Okay, so now let's look at Foreach. Foreach basically to say how we can iterate with Foreach. So let's say I have a list. Okay, this is an array, doesn't matter, or list of students, and I want to print every element of this. So this is my array, right? When we say dot for each, we are calling a method that is defined for arrays and lists and a Scala collection. That's called, this is a method name, right? Method name, and this is the input. So here I'm passing a function literal. So function literals, as we said, they are useful to pass as an argument to a higher order function. So what is a higher order function here is for each, and I'm passing this function literal as an input prom to this for each. So what are we doing here? What are we saying? We are saying for every element of this array, we are passing this, we are calling a println function. So I'm just gonna clean up a bit and we're gonna look at it again. So let's say here, right, we say we have the input that we want to pass to our function here, and this is the body. Here, our argument is just a string, is just a st, because when you call for each, it's saying get every element of this array. Basically, it's going through the whole list of the array. And here we are saying pass this to the println, which we all know what's println, and call this function. Isn't it cool and amazing? But at the same time, very easy to understand. It looks strange in the beginning, but as soon as you get used to it, you just love using it, right? So let's see what's going on here. We can also say, we can also specify the type and say, but I think this misses the parenthesis here. You can say for every string, every element of this array that is from the type string, call this function println, or you can just not call it. Let's just look at Scala and see how we are doing this. Okay, so we had students, right? Which is a list of students, right? So I'm calling the method for each. We're going to look at for each here. You see, it's a for each, and what it does, it's check if the list is empty, and it checks, it returns the head and the tail. So basically, it goes through every element of the list and it returns it to us until the list is not empty. So here I'm saying for each element of inside this list printed. So let's just run and see how it works. So instead of writing this traditional for loop, you can just use for each. There's another way to do this. It's the same way, but we can also specify the type. Here I'm saying for every string, pass it to println. But again, we can even make it more abstract and cool. And how is that? So if you look at here, just going to clean up my board. Okay, so if you look here, just going to use this. Okay. There's a rule in Scala that says if the function literal has only one statement with one single argument, we can remove it. So here, this is a function literal, is it, right? Or here, let's talk about this. We have only one argument, right? And we have only one statement. So this is a statement. And this is our argument. So we have one here and one here. And because of this rule, we can remove everything. So we don't need to actually define it. We can just say println. So we remove this, we remove this, we remove this, and we get to this point, which is so cool. Let's try it. We have student dot for each println. Let's see if it does the same work. Yes. So next time you define a Scala list, you can just call dot for each println because it's going to go through every element of the list and send it to println function. And that's just so cool to do. That's it for this session. Thank you.